rather higher attitude than aptitude, right? Naturally, we're looking for aptitude or competencies, but what's more important to me is the attitude.
26 years of progressive automotive experience across some of the biggest brands like Volvo, Lexus, Mercedes, Genesis, and Volkswagen. I am so excited for this chat, Vishnu. Thank you for doing
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
it. First question: how did you get into automotive?
Um, I, yeah, if I reflect on, as you mentioned, it, right, 26 years, so definitely it's been decades, right? So clearly you've aged me with that sort of introduction. But I think as I reflect, I've always been gravitating to things that have wheels on, right? Whether it's, a bicycle, a motorcycle, or a car, right? And I think of my early days, I would just sit in vehicles and just daydream, push every single button, put the clutch in and start shifting gears, even though, I was not legally allowed to drive. And that just continued manifesting throughout, I guess, my younger days. And I lived on a plantation, so you don't really need a driver's license. So I started driving at age of 11. Uh, I mean, private roads, so I wasn't breaking any rules, but I started driving at the age of 11. And yeah, I guess as I moved into high school and I guess further education, I'll confess, automotive was not my initial degree. I actually started off mechanical, but I crashed and burned my first semester. I didn't do well. There was no passion that kind of propelled me in what I was studying. I switched to automotive in my second semester, and I got to say, at that point, things engaged, and I got done with school and started my career, and I think I'm one of the fortunate ones that have managed to find a career with something that I've been always passionate from day one. I know that's a struggle for many people out there, but I got to say I've been fortunate that yeah, I've managed to build a career on something that I was passionate from in the early days. That started off as a hobby, but now it ended up becoming I guess yeah, the definition of what my career has been.
I definitely want to dive into this. That you said it right. That many people find it later in life, and I wish and I believe that everybody does, but they eventually do find what they're passionate about. So typically, for all the youngsters out there, or even people who are in their careers and still trying to find what they're passionate about, any particular advice that you have that they can apply and figure out, this is what I'm passionate about, because we have many hobbies.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's harder, coming from an Asian family. You're either a lawyer, doctor, or a loser, right? uh, you get this pressure that you got to go into one of those traditional verticals, right? And and even for myself, what I did was really unpopular because everyone was studying mechanical and electrical. When I switched to automotive, that there's this fear that you're going to be jobless, right? That you won't be able to build a career because no one did automotive, right? 20 over years ago. And but having said that, like I take a step back and I look at people's careers, right? Like at different stages, that some of them feel like this was just a job. It's not something that I know that represents my values or what I like. And I know it's tough, but I do go back and I say this to even my kids, like just do something, try everything that's out there and find what engages you. And if you like it, put yourself on that path, even though it's unpopular, right? Because I've seen too many people, in their 30s or 40s, and they've reached the points like, you know what, I'm tapping out of this job because I don't find it rewarding, I don't find it meaningful, and life's too short. Life's too short to be miserable. So if it's not working for you, then make that switch, right? Try something different, because I've seen people just tolerating it because this is what people thought I should be doing. This is the pressure of the family or the community. But 10 years in, 15 years in, you're still not happy. And it doesn't propel you forward in your career because if you're not happy, you're not going to do your best or you just do what's enough. And I don't think it's going to really propel you forward in that field, right? So you might as well take a timeout, reassess the situation, maybe study something else, and make that shift, right? Pivot into something that really would engage you, right? So It's tough, especially coming from an Asian family that, you got your traditional verticals, but you only have one life, right? So make the best out of it.
Absolutely. And talking about that, so you started your career in Malaysia and you worked your way up to heading a division for Lexus in the country. What kind of goals did you set for yourself when you started working? And were there any sort of plans that you'd put together that this is how I'm going to build my career?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Like, I think of my first job, right? So, first job in Malaysia, and I was, actually a service advisor in one of the largest workshops. And when you think of the initial step, let me back up a little bit. We all go to school to pick up a technical skill, or a technical or a functional skill, right? And hopefully that skill opens up, the door to your first job. And you get in, and whether it's your first 4 to 5 years, you're kind of leveraging the technical skill that you've most likely you've learned from your education, right? But I guess going back to your question, what I then started looking at is, say, if I'm gonna aspire to start moving into different roles, because you start seeing the potential paths, right? Am I going to stay in service, and am I going to make the shift to sales? What I then realize is that, yes, I do have the hunger to do more from a technical perspective, because I want to do, get deeper into whatever area that I was in. In that case, it was in after sales. But I also realized that as you start moving and looking at people that are in at senior levels, it's not just technical skills that they have. They have built people skills, or how to interact with people, because they're leading teams. It's not just you constantly doing, you got to inspire and lead others. And that's where I think in my first 5, 10 years, the aspiration started evolving. That's like, what, I don't want to be just an expert in what I'm doing today technically. I want to be able to engage, inspire, and motivate people, right? Because ultimately that's what's going to make us successful as an organization. So I started seeing from, a doer to maybe a people leader, right? And I think that transition happened when I made the move to Volvo from Mercedes, and I started realizing, okay, what, I have to start building this new muscle, because I didn't have that muscle. All I had was, okay, that functional skill, right? And that's when you start really building a new skill set that typically is not taught in schools, on how to engage larger teams or cross-functional teams. So yeah, that for me, that was the aspiration, that in 10 years I wanted to become a manager or a senior manager, because I found it engaging, that I can influence people and I can motivate them to do better things. So that, for me, I found that rewarding.
That's amazing. And it is important to have people around you who are also inspiring you and mentoring you. So, anybody in particular at the time that you can recall was like a source of inspiration to you, or you would rely on them for any sort of mentorship?
Yeah, I mean, until today, like, I mean, even though I'm in a different country, I still, have people on my WhatsApp. Like, whenever I'm stuck with something, and I just want to get a perspective, I reach out to I would say they're not formal mentors, but there's like life coaches, right? Over the years, they've been my managers, my directors. But one thing that has resonated with me, and it's really a short statement that this individual made, because, when you're in a technical role, you're constantly trying to um, guide and maybe sometimes police the people that work with you, right? In our business, you've got always working with dealers. And he came by and and he said this to me, and it still resonates until today, is that people don't react well when there's a police around, but they react well when there's a coach. And that was a change in mindset, because sometimes working in OEMs and working with dealers, we're always kind of telling people what to do, and maybe sometimes speaking down, or in a different sort of tonality. And I think that made the shift, that say, what, I need to think this from the ground up. How can I coach the people that I work with? How can I support them to do what I want them to do, by giving them the why behind it, right? So something really simplistic, but it made a profound impact in my style, because I started recalibrating my approach and changing my, I guess, my tonality and style with the people that I worked with.
That's so profound. And, it brought a smile to my face because this is exactly what my mentor had told me when I had joined BMW in India. And I was coming from the luxury print media industry. So I had nothing to do with automotive. And he told me that, you don't expect that you just walk into a dealership and people will suddenly start listening to you because you're from the OEM. You haven't sold a single car or heard a single customer yell at you or negotiate with you. So you have zero credibility right now. What your job is to essentially is to make sure that if there are any obstacles that the retailers or the dealer or the network faces, you're able to provide a solution to them, be the facilitator, learn from them, hear them out properly, and once you hear them out, you'll automatically know what to do. And it's that's why it just brought such a huge smile back to me, because what you said just resonates so well with me. So thank you for sharing that. I'm very interested in this because here is where a big change happens. So from Malaysia you moved to Canada in 2008, and then you joined JD Power. And for people who don't know, JD Power is one of the leading automotive information services company. We've all had and being an immigrant, we've had some interesting experiences that I'm going to dive into a little later, but I want to definitely hear from you that could you tell me about some of the challenges and the experience that you had while looking for a job in Canada after having been a business head in Malaysia? So what was that transition like?
It sucks. I gotta say, and I say it in the sense that it's people, and whether it's migrating to Canada or someone migrating to another country, and a lot of people have, they are educated individuals, and they have a professional life, and they think it's easy to make that transition to a new country, right? And I was one of those, let's say, naive individuals thinking that, I've got a decent job in Malaysia. I've got a degree that's from I guess from America, that I would make the transition easy, right? In Canada, that I would get a job easily. And what I've painfully realized, and this is why naturally I'm really, sometimes it's not in the early days, I got to say, it wasn't easy for me to even share the experience, right? Because you lose your self confidence. You, to some extent, you lose your dignity when you try to explain this to others, right? That, hey, I was jobless for 5 months, and yeah, I was jobless for 5 months, and it's a huge shock to the system because we're all working, hard working, 40 hours, 60 hours a week, and then you get on a plane, you arrive in this country, and all of a sudden, I have less of a self-worth. And maybe it's wrong, but people do associate their worth with what they're doing. And when you're really running at a high pace in your life in your home country, you get on this plane and you think that, hey, and maybe I'll get a job in 30 days and I'll be doing something similar. But when that's like a massive sort of a halt in your career path, it can break you. So for me, it was a painful journey because it was pre LinkedIn days. So I arrived. All I had was one business card, and I remember taking the bus a couple of times because I wanted to make sure I could get to the building. I took a and then finally got to that building, and I thought, okay, that this individual would see my value of having worked in Lexus or the Toyota organization in Malaysia and give me something. It didn't work out, and I went, okay, that's it. I got only that lead, and now I've got zero leads. So for 5 months, was, as the expression goes, I was pounding the pavement and looking for any opportunities, constantly recalibrating, like because I wanted a role that was similar, but then I realized that, okay, I got to recalibrate. It's not going to work out this way. And then unfortunately, I heard things 15 years ago that I still hear today, that you don't have Canadian experience, or and so on, right? Or you're overqualified or you're underqualified. I call it the Goldilocks syndrome. At some point I got frustrated, right? I'm too hot, too cold. When is it ever going to be just nice? And I went through that for about 5 months, and I eventually was fortunate enough to connect with someone in JD Power, who believed in the value that I could bring in from, I guess, my work experience from Malaysia, and then that started, I guess, my chapter in Canada. But I'm summarizing it, but there was a lot that happened in that 5 months. But it wasn't easy, and this is where in today we have people like you and me now. We've built a network at trying to help others, right? So that at least that cycle time that they have can be shortened, or at least we can give them comfort that here's one way of navigating this very difficult terrain.
It is, and I had something similar. I went through something similar like you did because I was without a job for 6 months, and for me, the confidence came because prior to which I was working with one of the leading media houses in India called Hindustan Times. Everybody knows what Hindustan Times in India is, but nobody, not a soul in Canada knows, and specifically the industry that I wanted to be in. But what gave me confidence was the fact that, hey, I've worked for the BMW group in India, so it's a recognizable brand. So I was anticipating that, I will grab a job like that. And then 6 months go by, like you said, your confidence takes a hit. uh, you come crashing down to planet Earth, and you're like picking up the pieces and trying to understand that, oh, what's missing. So I do I do share the pain, and I understand the insecurities that people go through. What's interesting is that obviously when you look back, it's easier to connect the dots, but going forward, you can't. Um, did you feel that now, when you look back at your journey, that how did JD Power play a role in what you eventually are doing? Because when I was looking at your profile in LinkedIn, that's where you were working a lot on customer experience and how these insights are shaping, and of course, from service now to digitalization, and in between there was customer experience as well. So it's easier to connect the dots, but how did JD Power and that experience play, what sort of a role did it play in your journey?
No, it played a significant role, even though it was, I guess, short-lived, and I can talk about that as well. But it was, I would say, I was fortunate because I had, I worked with a director that really tried to tap into the skill sets and the experience that I brought to the table. So I was exposed to clearly a lot of OEMs, a lot of dealer groups, and someone that's coming from, let's say, outside the country. It was an amazing opportunity for me to sort of read the terrain, right, in terms of the OEMs and the cultures here, because there are nuances, and I'm sure you've seen that as well. And it gave me a sense of, okay, what are the some of the systemic challenges in the industry, right? Because I would say North America has its, slight differences when it comes to challenges. But and for someone new, again, pre LinkedIn days, right? It was the best way for me to get to know OEMs and start building a network, because I couldn't find people online. But going into, client meetings, you would meet people from all the different brands, and then I would say in that year and a half, I got to know, some, let's say, the movers and shakers of the industry, right? But what happened, which again, maybe coming back to your earlier question, we hit the I guess the worst global recession in 2008. So unfortunately, here I go again, right? So that JD Power had to naturally right size the organization, and it came to a point, and if you worked in an OEM in dealer group, when things get tough, the last thing you do is spend money with consultants. So clearly, JD Power had to downsize, and again I was in between jobs. And that point was even harder because I think it was one global recession, so no one was hiring, and so that lasted even longer. That went on for 6 months before I got the opportunity with Mercedes. So I've had, two, I guess, moments where it's humbling, but I've also learned a lot in terms of, recalibrating, and this is like my why if the people that I work with in terms of, guiding, I sometimes I come across as very intense, because what I went through was intense. So I try to guide people. It's like it's okay for you to be over prepared, but don't be under prepared, right? In terms of networking, or preparing your resumes and so on. So yeah, going back to your question, I think JD Power gave me an opportunity to network, to get to know the industry when there was very little available online, and I couldn't really do much without, I guess, LinkedIn being so as mature as it is today.
Thanks for sharing that because I can only imagine how difficult it would be prior to what life was in LinkedIn. I don't think any of us remember that now, but of course, just going back, um, a new country, no LinkedIn, then a global recession to deal with. Of course, I mean, the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, and you've had to take it in your stride and move forward. Mercedes was great. You spent about 5 years in after sales and business development, and later you moved to customer experience and digital innovation within Mercedes, Genesis, and now at VW. So I'm curious to know that how did you plan this transition?
I don't think I planned. I mean, with Mercedes, again, recalibrating, right? Because I took on a role as a supervisor in after sales, responsible for parts, service, accessories, and national accounts. And what I clearly remembered is that I took every single thing that was given to me and I ran with it, and then some. There's always this argument sometimes you have with individuals saying, before you give me more work, I want to be paid more. Like, give me the money and I'll do more work. My approach, and again, it's my approach, is I've always been the reverse, where I'll do more work and I'll prove it to you that I deserve more money. And it's not just money, meaning money and your role and so on, right? And I think that's always been my approach. Some say, hey, that's not smart, but that's my, let's say, value system. So what happened was, which is interesting, because they brought me in as a supervisor, and I think within a year or 18 months, I started redefining the scope of what the department was doing. And then they realized, okay, this guy has got the appetite to do more. Let's give him more. And so I took on accessories. I took on, I think, parts wholesaling, and then the role got elevated by virtue of me taking on more responsibilities. So one of it was just me kind of moving upwards because of the role growing. That was one, I think, one transition where I made the switch from a supervisor to a manager. And then so that was about my 5 years in after sales. But throughout that time, I was always naturally super involved in customer experience topics, right? Based on my experience working with JD Power and the fact that I ran a Lexus store, I've always been super focused, obsessed with customer experience. So at some point, I think the organization realized, okay, this guy talks the talk. He's always making comments about customer experience, that we should do this, that, and whatever. Let's give him the opportunity to solve some business problems, right? So that's when I was moved into a role called customer experience, focusing on, yeah, ultimately kind of moving the needle for the brand. And yeah, so that's when I made the shift away from after sales into customer experience. And in today's world, you can't really deliver a positive customer experience without a digital solution. They kind of work, right? You need people, you need process, you need technology. So that's how I started seeing myself. Okay, you know what? If it's CX, I need all these three dimensions, and I started working on those solutions. Yeah, but I have to thank, I guess, Mercedes for giving me that opportunity. But it's, I would say, the I didn't plan for it, but I always poked my head into things that maybe it wasn't my area, but I made sure that, okay, I was delivering value, and ultimately people realized that, hey, he's got the appetite for it. Let's feed him, right?
That's interesting. So, my takeaway from what you've said is the fact that one of the ways that if you're interested in a certain or specific part of the business is to obviously show interest and proactively take some sort of initiative there. And initiative taken is always recognized by the leaders. And that's one of the qualities that people are looking for. That are you just checking the boxes, or are you somebody who's going that extra mile, right?
Yep. And some have this argument that it's generationally challenging now when you're working with a younger generation of I guess team members, that people want to work, based on the really tight boundaries, right? but it didn't work for me, and that's never been my approach. I've always, if this has been served on my plate, yeah, you got to clean what's on your plate first, but then I want more, right? And if I can deliver that additional, let's say, task or project consistently, no one ever's gonna, look away the fact that you have done more for the organization. It's never going to be a demerit on someone if you finish whatever on your plate first and you took on more, right? I mean, in my career working with multiple OEMs, that's never a bad thing. And I just wish that you have people with that attitude, but sometimes people want that immediate recognition before I do more, right? And it's tough because the jumping off point that I think you have when you've done it is that you've got something tangible to say that I've done this. I've taken on that additional project that you've given me and I've delivered, as opposed to saying in theory that I could do it, but I want the recognition first. You have nothing for, and there's nothing tangible to present. Whereas once you have done it, it's clearly tangible.
That's some amazing advice, and I'm sure that the listeners are going to take away a lot of value from what you've just said. Um, my next question to you would be, and you did shed some light on this, that you started off as a advisor and now director digitalization at the VW Group Canada. You always believed throughout your career that you rather be over prepared than under prepared, and learned from the school of hard knocks of switching jobs to a new country, coming to a new country, and during that process also fighting off a global recession. So my question to you over here is that there are some big interviews that you've given, and as you've progressed through your career, is there like a secret sauce or secret formula that you can share with us, that how did you prepare for these interviews, and what's the mindset behind your preparation, and also shed some light on how do you not let the occasion get the better of you, because a lot of people go and get stuck there, that it's an interview, there is added pressure. I mean, just to put perspective, 6 months of no job, and now you gotta just make this happen. So, how do you deal with that kind of pressure?
Yeah, so one thing that I'll say that maybe I didn't do as much in the early days is the preparation part, right? Because one tends to look at your you look at your resume, and you do a little bit of a scan of the role, and then you show up, right? Whether it's in person or virtual. What I started doing, again, throughout my gaps in my career, was in preparation for that interview, is really spending time going through the steps as a consumer, right? And in our business, that's easy to do because you could go online, you could build a car, you could look at pricing, you could. And I remember, right, taking the bus to dealerships because I didn't have a car. Like, I would take the bus to dealerships. I remember in a snowstorm, right? And I would walk in there and size up what's happening, right? This because you can learn a lot. You hear the conversations, you try to go through it as a mystery shopper to some extent, but you learn a lot. And I've provided the same advice to people as well, right? You go and check out that particular dealership or the brand. If you can, take notes, because when you walk into that interview and you provide examples that I was actually at this dealership and this happened and that happened, 100% the hiring manager, HR, is going to go, okay, I didn't know that, because they, to a large extent, we all sit in the head office. We don't spend enough time at retailers, and that's where the rubber meets the road, or that's where the real customer is, right? So I think people discount that. A lot of people say, I don't need it. I know this because I come from the industry, whether it's from Malaysia, Brazil, or whatnot. It's different. You bring an actual example, it it engages the hiring manager or HR. So that's something I would fully encourage people to do. The other benefit of doing that, it gives the person confidence. So you're not giving textbooks answers, or cookie cutter responses, right? You're saying, based on that question, let me use this example that I just observed at this dealership, or online. I saw this happen. I saw some sort of competitive sort of example, right? It gives you confidence, because I've seen too many people, they get in the moment and then, they panic because they don't really have a reference, they don't have a picture of reality to bring into the conversation. So I hope I answered the first part. Yeah, I guess the other point is, you get into this, and I clearly, I've been in interviews and I interview people, right? It's you you try this in an interview, you're compelled to say yes to everything. That, yeah, I can solve world hunger, right? Because hey, there's some amount of, I want to get a job, right? I want to get back into the industry that I love, right? And and you don't want to come across that, yeah, you know what, I can solve world hunger. So I would say, it's okay to say that I don't fit this. I don't really have experience in this space, but maybe there's something that I could learn, or there's something that I can pick up, right? Don't feel compelled to answer yes, because that itself is a flag that people will then be concerned. Okay, this sounds too good to be true. So I know sometimes in the moment of excitement, in the moment of stress, some people just try to say yes to everything, but I think that's usually a flag as well to the people sitting on the other side of the table.
So, definitely for the listeners out there, one immediate actionable tip is that when you're in an interview, it's all right to say no to certain things and just admit the fact that you don't know. You're not supposed to know everything about everything, right?
Yeah, and I still don't know everything that I need to know in this role that I am. No one ever is ready, right? And I say this to a lot of people that when we get into performance reviews, in nearly all the organizations I've been in, and you always have someone that'll say, "Oh, I don't think this person is ready," and I usually turn it around. It's like, I don't think you are ready for this role, because no one is ever a perfect fit. No one is ever a perfect fit, but you need the right attitude of that individual, and with the right guidance, that person can fit the role.
So, it is safe to say that one of the filters that, and I'm flipping the scenario here, that when you're hiring, you're one of the scenarios that you're looking for, or one of the qualities that you're looking for, is what sort of attitude the person has. That's important.
100%, 100%. And you might have heard me say this before, right? Like, it's I rather hire attitude than aptitude, right? Naturally, we're looking for aptitude or competencies, but what's more important to me is the attitude. Because if someone's got the right attitude in terms of being able to understand guidance, understand coaching tips, and has the attitude of learning, or being able to take on things, and there's a hunger to learn and to grow, then that person I'm sure can do great things. But if we have an individual that maybe the attitude does not line up with my values, then I think we will struggle, right? Because yeah, you can be the best person from a technical perspective, but if you have the worst attitude, you end up being, to a large extent, the weakest link in the team or in the organization.
I couldn't agree more with you. I'm going to stick on this topic for a bit because it's also very relevant to the times that we are in right now, with the recession and a lot of people losing jobs right now. I think it's important that everybody is keeping their sword sort of sharp, or the axe sharp, so that if, and being in general prepared for what's ahead of us. So, I'll begin with the first part, where I'll talk to people who we represent, immigrants, the community. There are going to be a lot of people who are also going to be coming into Canada. So the question is that, networking right now is something that a lot of stress is given on, and I believe that that's the way of things as well. So, as per you, what are some of the do's and don'ts to networking? Let's start with the basic ground up. That, give me some tips on the do's and don'ts of networking.
I would start with humility, right? Because and I say this, coming from the place of support, and I love the community, I love diversity that we have in the country. But if the person coming into the country, if we has to be grounded in the sense that you're reaching out for help, be humble in the request, be polite, and be clear in the sense that, okay, here, I'm in the country, I'm a landed immigrant, I've heard about you, would you be able to grab a coffee with me. For me, that will be always the good start, right? Not assuming that, I'll just go on LinkedIn and just click connect without any background or introduction. For me, it's like, it's being overzealous, thinking that everyone is here waiting to network. I think we all have busy lives, and we're doing this because it feeds our soul. We want to help others, but there needs to be some amount of humility in the approach, and be, provide a bit of an introduction, explain a little bit of who you are, why you're asking for help clearly, right? You're asking for guidance and coaching, because I've seen examples where there's a little bit of sense of, okay, and not entitlement, but assumption, right? That just because I'm reaching out, I'm hitting that very easy button called connect, that I'm going to accept it, right? So I would say start with that, being humble throughout the process, because that will resonate really well with the people that you want help from. And because sometimes there's a feeling of, I was someone in my home country, now I'm in between jobs, and there's some amount of, let's say, negative energy that comes across, that, hey, I can't get a job, and but it's not my fault. Right? I'm not the culprit here. I'm here to help you, right? But I think sometimes people find it difficult, and they bring that feelings out, saying that, I've been trying, no one's calling me, I can't get HR to return my calls, can you help me, right? And I'm going, that's not going to resonate with me. If there's a little bit more of humility, then sure, I'll pick up the phone and let's chat, right? Because I didn't create that. Yes, I recognize that it sucks to be in this situation, but I'm here to help you navigate this terrain, right? Hopefully it will change and get better. I hope, I like to think it's better now than, let's say, 15 years ago. But yeah, so I guess coming back to your question, like humility, stay grounded, be really transparent on why you're asking for help, and I'm sure there will be a lot of rejections. I mean, some people are just too busy, or they don't see value in networking. But I've always said this to everyone, including myself, like, you put in 10 requests, even if nine rejected, that's fine. One person is going to return that private message or direct message.
Yeah, and I firmly believe that it becomes the game of numbers at some point in time. If you're somebody who's applying for jobs or networking, you need to be lucky once. You need that one job, and you never know where that is going to come from. But like you said, I think it's important to have some sort of humility while you're doing this, because let's flip the scenario. How many times does somebody reach out to you and just do you respond to every single LinkedIn request that you get? Or it's a little, how do I say it, you can't just randomly write to somebody and say, hey, I need the job, can you send my resume to HR?
And you bring up a good point, because i- if if you are going to recommend someone, then your brand is now affected, right? Because you're providing a recommendation. So there is this perception sometimes, and maybe that's where, we have to educate people, whether it's a newcomer or a fresh graduate, that I can't just forward a resume, and because I don't think it does justice to anyone in this equation, right? Doesn't do justice to the candidate, doesn't do justice to me, because then I'm just randomly floating. It's not like a Facebook post, right? I'm just liking it and sharing it. I have to know whom I'm recommending, and then I can at least say a few words saying, hey, you may want to check out this candidate. I spoke to her about an hour. Seems like a great candidate in the marketing space, right? Now the person getting that email or that LinkedIn recommendation will find value in it. I think there's some out there that feel that, okay, hey, since you work for this organization, can you just forward my resume to HR? And I think by doing that, I don't think it's going to increase the probability of you getting screened and hired, right? But imagine if you invested times like, hey, I see that you're working for that organization. Would it be convenient for you, for us to grab a quick call or something, right? And then you can present yourself. If and that individual might say, maybe it's not the right fit, or you sound like a good fit. Let me provide a recommendation, right?
That is so amazing. This is really insightful, because how you unpack this is amazing. That why not have a conversation with the person who you're reaching out to for a reference, and let them know who you are, because once they have certain context to and some sort of idea about who you are, what your experience is, you would go with more confidence and be able to recommend that person, and that just adds more credibility to the entire process.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's maybe the definition of networking is different depending on the individual, right? Some think that okay, just because I found you working for that organization, that you'll be comfortable to forward my resume. But that's for me. That's I want to know the people that I am recommending, or saying, hey, you may want to check out this profile of this candidate. And yeah, so and for me, that's where I've seen more success stories. That right, because if I forwarded a resume to this company, and I can even maybe say something to the hiring manager, they respect my perspective because I've actually spent an hour at a minimum with this individual, not here's some random person that reached out to me on LinkedIn, right?
Awesome. I love this input from you, and this is some great advice for everybody out there looking at networking. I think it's also true for not just for people who are immigrants to the country, but also for people who are sort of stuck in mid-career or between jobs. They want to look for another job. They're looking at leveling up. So this is one way to network. Definitely, I mean, I can see the value in it. And also, what you mentioned was that it impacts your personal brand as somebody who's referring the candidate, and that's a perfect segue into my next question. That I've heard a lot about personal branding in an organization, and I know that a lot of people are still wrapping their head around this concept. A lot of people who are moving to the country, they are still also trying to understand what this personal branding is all about. So would you be able to give us some sort of insights on personal branding, if I am from two perspectives? Number one, if I'm new to the organization, so I have a clean slate, and how do I build a personal brand? And later I would request you to tell me that if I already am working in an organization and now I feel that I want to level things up for myself and my career, it's not going as I had envisioned my career to go, so I need to probably shake a few myths about myself. How do I change my personal branding?
Yeah, I look at it, it's also very similar with how we rate brands, right? In general, whether it's a product that we associate ourselves with, whether it's, an iPhone or whatever, right? It's if you think of certain products that we have, we build a brand equity on a product because it delivers on our expectations consistently, right? At every touch point, right? Apple is maybe a really good example, right? They've been consistent, and at every touch point, you delivers on your expectations, right? And so I look at individuals as the same as well. That especially someone that's new to the country, people don't know you. We don't have that same amount of social circle that we had in our home country, right? Because there you built a network over decades, and when you're here, I find that you've lost, you've eroded, let's say, your brand equity. And so with every single opportunity you have, you're meeting up with people, what you say and do ultimately starts building that that adding some plus signs in your brand equity. And when I bring that to an organization, okay, now you've got your first job, and whilst you've had maybe 5-10 years working in your home country, you gotta maybe expect or assume that you're starting off at zero. I know it's a tough thing for people to process, because they go, no, I was a senior manager or whatnot in your home country. Yeah, but the people that are working with you don't know that, and they clearly cannot put their hands on it. So you got to start off with a little bit of a net zero environment. The point I'm trying to make is that with every single task you're given, every single time you are facing senior executive, cross-functional teams, each time someone hands you the mic, it's your opportunity to deliver on is being asked, and then some, if you truly want to rebuild your career, right? Because if you're kind of taking some readjustments in your career, so it's that's where I think people start building their personal brand. And it's not just the work that's done, but the attitude, going back to our earlier discussion, right? The attitude that you bring. And so for me, I've always seen it that some people are real good workers, but they're quiet. And sometimes it's a cultural differences as well, because all of us have to readjust to working from a different country to here. And but you don't want to miss out the opportunity that you're constantly, you're doing what is being tasked. You're a you're a solid employee. But if you don't try to get into the spotlight, or when there's an opportunity for you to speak or present, then people may discount the your true brand equity. So I always encourage, and I read the room, and I see this, right, especially with fresh graduates and newcomers, right, that you don't have the confidence to lead a meeting, or you don't have the confidence to present. And if you get comfortable with that structure, I think you put yourself at risk of being flagged as a solid employee, but not a leader, someone that will have limited, let's say, upward mobility, right? If you constantly stay in the corner. So that's where my recommendation for people that, clearly that are hungry, they want to go somewhere, then you definitely have to invest in building a brand. And building a brand is, trying to get in front, trying to take additional projects, trying to speak when you're given the opportunity, and don't just get into that comfortable space of, what, I'm just going to keep my head down and do my work, because that might work out if you're comfortable with the role that you're in. But if you're hungry, you got to invest more in your building a brand.
And leaders always do more. They have I mean, like I'm talking to you, I know that you're making decisions all the time. There are not just the projects that you're handling, you're handling a significant amount of team members, their issues. You're handling business decisions which are which impact the company as well. And then you also find time to do these sort of interviews. And the fact that outside of work, you're a parent, you're a husband, you have a life that you're kind of managing as well. So of course, one has to keep pushing the envelope, and growth happens when you're outside of your comfort zone.
And one thing I'll add, though, because people get really, let's say, anxious, or restless, maybe that's a better word. They get very restless as they get into a role, right? That 3 months, 6 months, I want to get promoted, right? And not that it cannot happen, but what would also definitely recommend is that make sure your layers are solid, right? As you build your foundation, that it's solid, that because that's your brand. Because if you're if individuals are constantly getting restless, 6 months I'm moving on to the next role, and another 6 months I'm moving into the next role, that ultimately doesn't build a solid value proposition or brand proposition of yourself. So build that depth, right, in what you're doing. And if some people learn fast, and that's okay, but build that depth, right, and before you move on to the next role. Because I say this for a lot of fresh graduates and immigrants, because you take on a role, and then 3 months in, 6 months in, you're restless and you want to move on, and it's fine, but you don't want to constantly keep doing that, because you end up coming across as a person with not enough depth in what you're doing. Like some introduce themselves as is, I've been working in the automotive industry for 25 years. I always ask myself, and putting it crudely, is it 5 times 5 25, or 2.5 times 10? Because is it the same thing that I've been doing for 10 times, or has there been depth in what I'm doing, right? Because there's no, well, less value if it's 2.5 times 10, right? And So yeah, that's something I would definitely encourage people. It's like, think about the moves that you're making, and make sure that you build solid layers in your career.
That's interesting, and I think it automatically answers some of the things that I'd planned to ask you next. So that was a very nuanced answer in the sense that I have a lot that I can pick up from there. Having depth is something that is very valid, and I think that speaks volume of the sort of commitment an employee can also have towards the role and the organization, because that's something that is definitely a yardstick with which we measure and judge people. But what would be, apart from the time frame spent, the depth and attitude, what would be some of the other qualities that you're looking for when you're hiring somebody for a role in your team?
Well, I don't know. We talked about attitude, we talked about skills, competencies, and you know what? To a large extent, that's actually pretty extensive, right? But the other one that I typically look at is the dynamics of that individual or that personality profile, or some get into psychometric profiles, right? And what is that person's profile against the team members? And so when I'm looking at, and coincidentally this week we were looking at some candidates, I'm kind of going, okay, I can size up this person, but will this person work well with my team members? And because you got different personalities, some people are more dominant, some people like to influence, you got, there's many tools out there, right? There's a tool called disc. I don't know if you've been exposed to it, but yeah, there's a lot of psychometric evaluations. And I used to be a little bit of a pessimistic individual looking at psychometric evaluations, right? So you do a test, and ultimately they try to put you in, in, let's say, some buckets. And because all of us have different profiles, we have a mask that we have at work. We have a mask at work when we are under stress, and it changes because I'm sure you change your behaviors when you're under stress. And then you have a mask when you're at home, because I'm sure, a slightly different person when you're at home. And so there are a lot of assessments out there that ultimately try to put you into what is your personality profile. And and i i find that interesting, because when you sit down in a team, you could actually point out the different people, right? You find, okay, this person is more of a dominant individual, this person is more of a conformist, right? That steady, and that he or she just likes to be slow and steady, right? You're not going to be the first to be a problem solver. So when I get into interviews or candidates, I try to do it just by virtue of speaking to them. It's like, okay, is this person going to be a good fit from a personality perspective, from a behavior perspective? And it's sometimes it's really interesting to see how that can work out, because you want to find a good mix. That you might have someone that's an A-type personality, that's always a dominant. Whenever there's a problem, he or she will charge ahead and try to grab the problem, right? And in the team, it's nice to have a good balance, because you don't want everyone to be that A-type, or that dominant individual. So I try to look at that, because that helps me sort of predict how successful is this team going to be. And it's a little complex, and maybe I'm not doing the best in terms of describing it, but I've done this in some organizations where you would run people through this test, and you could sit back and just look at the profile and say, is this person going to work well with this person, by just looking at that psychometric evaluation. And I've had real case studies where we would predict that this is going to happen after 6 months or 9 months, and then we come back and we look at, yeah, you know what, there was some amount of friction between these two individuals. And it was interesting to see that, because we all have our predisposed behaviors. And there's interesting studies that I've done is you can actually predict how teams are going to function before even putting the teams together.
Thinking about it from a job applicant's perspective, that essentially what my focus would be if I'm applying for a job is that I look at the job description, I look at my resume and see that, okay, am I a fit here or not? Do I have I been able to articulate my experience and achievements in the best possible manner? And of course, if there is an interview, you present your best self in that environment. But uh, and that's where my decision making or my control ends. But like what you unpacked there was the nuances that go behind the scene, because you're not just hiring for a role, you're also looking at the entire team dynamics. So being the right personality fit, being the right culture fit, how the importance of that is crucial, because that's what defines long term success.
Yeah, and in some roles and in some organizations have really leveraged tools like this, where if you're hiring a customer facing role, or a role that really needs to deliver outstanding customer experience, you could easily find people that were predisposed to be nice, right? You walk into, I'm sure, if you walk into a Starbucks, or uh, whether it's the Ritz Carlton or whatnot, it's sometimes really easy to find that individuals like, you know what, you were born to be nice. It's not to say that Starbucks provided you with amazing training, but some people are just predisposed to be nice, and that's why they fit well in organizations like that. And so you have organizations now saying, for this role, I'm going to create this ideal profile. And when I have candidates coming in, you get them to do this test, and then you try to match the profile. And because that's, they are wired to do well in this role, right? And I've always found that interesting. Initially I was like a bit of a skeptic, but I've seen this play out, and I think it's really relevant, especially when you're trying to hire leaders, because you want to make sure you've got a strong leadership team, um, that's aligning to the organization's values, right? So sorry, I went off on a tangent there, but
Absolutely not. Damn, I can tell you one thing. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to this because I've never sort of, looked at things from this lens and this filter. And this just provides us, and when I say us, I'm definitely, I can speak for the audience as well that will be listening into our conversation, that this just gives us a good insight into your mind as somebody who's charged charged with developing teams for the future, bringing in talent that take the organization forward, because that's something that gets lost from a candidate standpoint, because you're just looking at it from a very transactional a lens, that yeah, I just need this job and I need X amount of dollars, and that's about it. So thank you for sharing this. I have two bonus questions regarding this topic over here, and I cannot not ask you this since we are talking to the director of digitalization. With the way AI is coming along, and all the digitalization that's ramping up around us, uh, do you think that degrees are still relevant, or it's all about skill set now?
oh, this is a tough one, right? Because it's a lot of especially with with Chat GPT now, the discussions of AI has really changed, right? People are now, there's a lot of fear built up because they've seen how scary good AI can be, right? Because it's so good. I'm completely fascinated with what's been happening, at least from coming out from OpenAI, and you start looking at, okay, what's going to happen to the future jobs and so on. But coming back to your question, I I at least in the last 5 years, especially in my space, right, that I'm working with a lot of technology. I'm working with a lot of technology partners. It does come down to specific skills. Like, I don't really care when I'm looking at working on a specific platform, whether it's a Salesforce ecosystem or whether it's Java, whatnot. I don't really care what degree you have. You could have a degree in chemistry, but that doesn't really apply here. I want to know if you have direct skills. Where do you have developer skills in Salesforce? Are you a Tableau developer? Do you know Google Analytics, right? So it's become really platform based, because that's what, as organizations, we all kind of working on different platforms and different ecosystems. So I think the degree might be a stepping stone to kind of get your foundation, but ultimately those skills are going to play a lot, sorry, will play a big role. But the other thing with AI, since you're talking about it, what I do find is I don't expect, because clearly even AI is going to do the coding for us, right? You don't need to code, and but how can we provide the right instructions or prompts to AI, right? Because that's this whole genre now of prompt engineering, and I think that's a skill set. Because now, if you look at it, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, uh, if you ask AI smart questions, you're going to get smart answers, right? But if they're very generic, you're going to get generic responses. So I think that's a skill set that's required. I mean, it might end up being a degree, right? Maybe it's going to be called prompt engineering. But yeah, so I do feel that it's pivoting now, that it's no longer if you have a degree, it's like, do you have this skill? Can you work in Salesforce? Can you work in Tableau? And so on, right? And it's making that shift, but I don't think it's completely out the door yet, meaning degrees are still valued, but it's the skill set. Or even if I take it to a different non-AI example, we all solve problems every day, we all project manage. That's two skill sets that sometimes you might have it in your degree, but if you don't have that skill set that you picked up in the degree, pursue that, right? Because project management, problem solving, whether it's Six Sigma, lean thinking, all valuable in today's world.
That's very interesting because I'll refer this. I'll bring in my chat with Lydia also over here, and I asked her the same question from a recruiter standpoint, and she said exactly the same things that you mentioned. That it is also a lot to do about how you're utilizing the system. So she says garbage in, garbage out. So if you're not asking and prompting the right questions, then you're not going to get the right responses. Other than that, it may help you get shortlisted through a pool of candidates, but then eventually when you're in that interview or you're talking to somebody, then it is about the skill set that you have, it is about the person that you are, it is about the values. So eventually right now where we are is, I guess it would be safe to say that we need to use AI to take over our mundane sort of tasks and help us with um, efficiently deal with tasks, etc. But still, it's something which has caused a stir, and it's interesting to see how people are going to adapt to it. I absolutely love the concept. And
Yeah, yeah, and no, yeah, I think it's fascinating, and to your point, right? Why would we spend time with why would we need humans to do repeated tasks, right? We've always adopted automation because it makes our life much easier. Why would it be any different today, right? Yeah, so I do see us changing in like how we've embraced technology in all other dimensions. So, but yeah, people are a little afraid, but I'm completely fascinated with where it's going.
and I think you also touched upon something which is important, and that has been probably the theme of our conversation as well. That you gotta be outside, step outside of your comfort zone. So it is going to be about upskilling yourself. Are you learning Tableau? Are you learning the next tools available? How good are you with Salesforce? And sound like a hypocrite saying that because I don't work on Tableau yet, and I have not worked on Salesforce either, but my focus has been somewhat over here. So I'm learning how to edit, and I feel that content marketing is going to be huge, given how we are progressing in general towards marketing, and content marketing already is a big thing. So I'm trying to upskill myself over here, but upskilling is absolutely crucial.
No, if all the respect, right? Because and I look at we constantly struggle with how do we communicate with all our stakeholders. And I was just having this discussion yesterday with some of the team members that traditionally you would hand people a manual or a book, right? Think of a car owner's manual. Whoever picks up an owner's manual today, if you're trying to figure out something in your car, right, you're most likely picking up your phone and I'm looking at a YouTube video. And because you try to even guide a person to an owner's manual, like it's most like that's the first thing I do is typically take the owner's manual and put it in the trunk because it's taking up space. um, but that's the consumer that we've become, right? That we don't have the ability to have the patience to read a owner's manual or to read a PDF document, right? We're consuming data or content in bite sizes, which is why I think kudos to you, because this is the way people consume data now, right? They want to watch a short YouTube video. They want to listen to a Spotify podcast on their commute to the work, right? And that's where even we were discussing, like from naturally we work with dealers. How do we change the approach? Because traditionally, we'll send out a bulletin and it goes out on the intranet, and we think that yeah, just because it's on the internet, everyone's going to read it. But no one's got that amount of patience today, because everyone's been spoiled in a good way of being able to ingest content in small bite sizes, right? And in more exciting ways like this, like what you're doing. So you're definitely in the right space, because this is how I consume content. And I don't want to be, directed to a manual or a PDF, right? I watch YouTube videos, I listen to Spotify podcasts, and yeah, so you're definitely in the right space. So kudos to you for, picking up this very relevant and unique skill, because this is something that I don't know how to do.
No, thank you very much. I can tell you I can thank YouTube for it, because all I've done is watched about 500 hours of YouTube to figure out what my space is going to be. Everything from setting up the camera to buying what equipment, everything, lighting, etc., which obviously will get better with time. But YouTube right now just changes the dynamics, and I'll talk shop a little bit over here. Like you said, bulletins, I mean, of course, anybody working in the automotive industry will realize that we send bulletins to our retail network, and what we forget is that you're just one team in a function sending a bulletin. Can you imagine the number of bulletins that the employees at the retail end receive on a daily basis? So my approach also with the team has been, and this is something that I started working on this year, is that can we create videos and send it to people, because it's easier to consume. You just hit the play button, you can listen to it 20 times, and then get something done, as opposed to just looking and staring at a document without being disturbed while you're doing that.
Yeah, and you think of the audience, right? The audience, in our case, it's dealers that it's a different paradigm, right? You've got customers in front of you, you've got things that rapidly evolving in their environment, and so you don't have the patience to click on the internet and let me read this document on a web page, right? So how do we take those that critical information, put it in different formats? And you think of the generational change we've made, right? From reading a book to a website. Now website is again boring, or not as engaging. It's YouTube, to your point. But even YouTube now, you look at it, it's also in some cases can be overwhelming, right? So it's Instagram Reels or TikTok, right? So we have to evolve, because that's how people are consuming content. So yeah, at some point maybe it's a reel. So imagine, right? You send out a reel for an after sales update, right? But maybe they'll watch it and they'll understand the point, as opposed to us, praying that they read this bulletin that's on the internet.
Uh, Absolutely. And one thing that I definitely agree to over here is the fact that, at least we can talk about the dopamine hit that we get from internet, and all these reels are probably taking away a lot of our time. But look at the positive. We've also learned how to communicate a message in under 30 seconds. So that's very much possible, and that's something which is a point that I take away, that in a world where we have death by presentation and excels, there is an opportunity to just communicate the message in 30 seconds or less as well. So that's awesome. Now I'm going to talk about passion and purpose, and I have witnessed this firsthand, obviously, since we met during one of our networking events, and the groups that you've organized. I'll dive into it over here. That there, I've seen that there is this need to help and support people, which has been part of your ecosystem for a while, and one of the things that makes you a great leader as well, and somebody who's very well respected within the automotive industry and outside as well. You're part of this community called Accelerate Auto, a community that's driving positive changes for Black professionals in Canada's automotive industry. You're a mentor at Toronto Regional Immigrant Employment Council. You were a founding member of the Diversity Advisory Group at Hyundai Canada, an ERG lead for newcomers at Mercedes. I want to understand more about your thinking over here and the drive behind helping, supporting, and mentoring people.
No, it's it's interesting. You went through quite a number of things. I can't say that everything has been me leading and championing it, but I think what I started seeing maybe very rewarding in the sense that with when I was in rooms, and this goes back to my time in Mercedes, I would sit in meeting rooms and I would see faces that were different, right? There's color, there's diversity, whether it's newcomers or whether it's immigrants, and I felt there was a little bit of me in them. That this person just arrived, quiet, timid, afraid to speak up, because sometimes when you're in the Canadian meeting environment, it's intense, and depending on where you're from, it can get a little overwhelming, right? Because everyone's talking on top of each other, and the meetings would start and meetings would end, and I didn't hear a word from the individual, right? So what I guess I wanted to do was to provide people somewhat of comfort that you do belong here, you do belong in this organization, you do belong in this country. And that's how I guess I started off with an employee resource group, for newcomers, just to get people together, right? Because when you're working, you don't really have the opportunity. Some don't want to talk about it. Some don't want to talk about that they feel like they are a minority in this country or in this building, right? And but then there's some say, hey, you know what, you look like me, you sound like me, maybe you can help me, right? And I found that in the fact that I was progressing, whether it's from a supervisor to a manager, that it was my responsibility, as the expression goes, right, to send the elevator down. So I started organizing groups, and some people would come into the room and say, "What is Vishnu doing?" Right? He's bringing all this, minority, but it's like, hey, I'm here to tell you my story, to tell you that that this is my journey hasn't been the easiest, and it hasn't been easy for me to even repeat it sometimes, but to tell the people it's okay if your journey has been, with some setbacks in Canada. It's okay if you're feeling like a minority in this meeting or in this building, but we are here to help, right? And then eventually I hope that people have found that, okay, you know what, sounds like he's gone through similar steps. People then start sharing their stories, right? And I think that's how it started, and gave me the confidence that not everyone is going to show up for this meeting, because some saying, hey, leave me out of this minority group, but some will show up and say, you know what, I want to hear him out, right? I want to see how I can learn from this individual. So that's why I think over the years I've taken that same mindset of how can I embrace the diversity that we have in the organization, and not just ethnic diversity, but more importantly, thought diversity, because all of us bring in a different perspective. And so, yeah, I think with my time moving into Hyundai, I got more involved with the CEO and with HR, set up a number of discussions to support diversity. And I think it was a couple of years back I joined Accelerate Auto, which is trying to promote more blacks into this industry of ours, because our industry is significantly polarized, right? It's dominated by white males. So there's clearly there's a gap when it comes to gender diversity, ethnic diversity. And I just want to, I guess my goal is to make sure that, or try to help people um, give them a sense of belonging in our industry, in our country. So yeah, I've done a few other things as well, mentoring people in the multiple groups. But again, I see people struggling, and where I maybe I can empathize and I can relate is when I hear those stories. I sometimes get emotional as well, because it takes me to the time that I was there, and that's where I get pretty intense. Like, hey, you reach out to me, I'm here to help, right? And I try to guide people, but I can't say that it's 100% success rate, but hopefully they take something away from that conversation.
Has the landscape changed since you started to now?
It's interesting, because a couple of months back, I met this lady from India, and again with automotive experience, and we were chatting, and I think it was 3 or 4 months in, and she gave examples of what she was hearing from organizations, from HR managers. And I said to myself, like, this is the same thing I heard 15 years ago, not having enough Canadian experience and so on. And I think it's a struggle. Some organizations have become a lot more progressive because they've seen, again, we paved the way for the people that are coming after us, right? So let's assume, I've worked in Mercedes, I've worked in Hyundai, right? And they've now seen an immigrant come in, that sounds like me or looks like me and whatnot, that has done a good job, and it changes the perception of immigrants. And I think organizations like that are going, hey, that was actually really good. That was a good hire. And we managed to get a lot of, let's say, value from that individual, right? And that person became, a leader and so on. Those organizations have removed their, let's say, blinders, meaning now they're more open in hiring immigrants, more open in hiring, let's say, um, in some cases, right? Like, a diverse workforce. I still think there's organizations that are still very close-minded, that they are afraid of hiring immigrants because of the training that's required, or the concern that they may not fit in. They don't understand the automotive landscape here. And I think it's still out there that some organizations have realized that so much of value you can get from hiring immigrants. Unfortunately, there's some that are still very close-minded, and it's up to people like us, whoever goes in first ultimately is not only building the brand of, going back to our discussion of personal brand, you're also building the brand of immigrants. So there's a little bit of a weight on our shoulders, because we're carrying the weight of, what I do in this organization represents immigrants. Because if you do an amazing job, someone's going to say, hey, next person from BMW India or someone from India is like, hey, that person most likely has a lot of exposure, a lot of experience, because we've seen this individual, right? Like a rock star. So yeah, sorry, I might have gone off a little bit of a tangent, but
No, it's bang on. And you said this, and I feel it and I can connect with it, that I think I understand a little bit of where the passion comes from, because we've had a similar sort of a journey. I just want to, I'm like a few years behind. I'm also experiencing the recession coming in now. So it's sort of deja vu, but in a different sense. But yeah, I do feel that sense of responsibility towards just helping out the community in general. And it's not just about immigrants from India, but immigrants in general, people who are uprooting themselves from a comfortable life where they've well settled and are coming to another country to start a new life, take on a new challenge altogether, not necessarily studying over here. So coming with families as well, it can get taxing because you have so many responsibilities. And mindset is very important, wherein you got to have the right mindset. And I laud you for everything that you are doing and inspiring people. So I was talking to my wife yesterday about this conversation that I was going to have with you today, and I said that I want to say this to Vishnu, that what he's doing is already successful, because not only are you helping people, but one of the people that you've inspired is me. And one of my goals through this podcast is to be able to provide that platform and that knowledge or information only to somebody who's new to the country, or anybody who's sort of trying to manage leveling up. And if that is successful, this is a shared success for Vishnu and for me, because that's really where you start from, right?
no, again, I give you all the support. I mean, it's clearly coming from a place of love, right? Because we all want to be loved by our adopted country. We all want to be accepted for who we are, and we want to bring our best to the country that we adopted, right? And sometimes that journey is not the easiest, but clearly we've got people here that are willing to support, right? And also kind of guide people to navigate this, but sometimes difficult terrain.
Absolutely. And staying on that topic, I mean, like I said, that I'm following your footsteps. We have a shared passion, apart from just helping people. Also, we have a shared passion towards running. And you are part of this elite group of 1% of the world's population who's actually completed a marathon. So, congratulations on that. And you must tell me about how was that experience of completing a marathon.
Yeah, that 1% still hurts. I yeah, so yeah, I gotta say that yeah, I was never really a runner, right? And I picked it up. Can't I started? I used to think people that ran 5 kilometers they were crazy, right? Like, what's wrong with you? What would make you run 5 kilometers, right? And what I found interesting, maybe it was 6 or 7 years ago, I started running, and I got to say, technology kind of helped because it starts playing in your mind that, hey, I did 2 kilometers, I didn't die. Maybe the next time I can run 3 kilometers, right? And that's how it started. And so I hit five. I did the Terry Fox run, which was 10 kilometers, and I found that really inspiring because when you're surrounded by people that have been affected by cancer, it just propels you to to finish the run, right? Like there's it's mostly in the mind. And then I started signing up for half marathons, and the reason I did that was is in a way to prove myself that I could do it, because I say this now, right? It's mostly in the mind, and a lot of us are challenged with mental limitations, right, in everything we do, right, whether it's trying to get on the diet or whatever that you're trying to do new. For me, it was more of fixated that because I've been telling myself I cannot do it, I really wanted to conquer that goal, right? So I started doing half marathons, and then I got comfortable with half marathons, and then I made the painful decision of signing for a full marathon. I completed it, but it wasn't the most graceful run. I had to stop multiple times, but and now I'm trying to just go back to half marathon. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and mostly what I've realized is it's less physical, it's mostly mental. Because even as you would know, your mind keeps telling you to stop. Right? Or yeah, oh, why are you putting on your shoes, right? Like it starts with putting on your shoes, right? But once you take the first step and you keep going, it's like, I did 5 kilometers, let me push myself and do 10, right? It's that challenging yourself, and that's what I think I find it somewhat a, a bit of an intoxicating sort of path, right? That I find it rewarding that I can hit those goals.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. Now, this is my last section, and it's called My Drift. I will ask you 5 questions, and you can answer them either in one word or a sentence. So, here it goes. One book that you would recommend everybody should read.
Who will cry when you die? A bit morbid, but I read this some years back. I should read it again because I think I need to be reminded on what's more important in life. So it's written by Robin Sharma. Who will cry when you die? And I think I read this a decade ago, and because we do a lot in our work lives, our personal lives, but at the end of the day, what's important, right? If you had, I know it's very morbid, but sometimes it's good for us to remind ourselves, like, hey, if you had X number of hours left or X number of days left, what would you do? Would you try to finish the last email from work? The last PowerPoint presentation. So it was a good book. It left a profound impact, and I think I should read it again because we forget as like all humans. But yeah, that was just a book up. Yeah.
Th- Thank you. That's an awesome recommendation. One skill that everyone should develop or work upon.
That's I guess a Japanese term called kaizen, right? And it's continuous improvement. And and I was exposed to the whole notion of kaizen when I worked for Toyota, and I got to say it's profound when you start understanding the culture behind kaizen. Is that you don't embark on big journeys immediately because that's most likely not sustainable, and most likely you fail, right? Like I can't say, and you know this, right? I can't say that I'm going to run a half marathon next week. Yeah, you might be able to do it, but you most likely you hurt yourself and you'll never do it again, right? And what I've, you can take the same thing with running, is like it's small improvements over time, right? You start off with your 2 kilometers and you start building, right? Because you get stronger mentally and physically, and over time you get to your goals. So that's what you look at it. You can take that same approach and apply it in business, obviously, or even with other areas in your personal life, right? How do you make small improvements, but sustainable small improvements?
Thank you. That's interesting. And definitely, we do all count the number of problems that we have, but we sort of lose focus on the solution. Um, your favorite restaurant in Toronto?
That's the easy one. I mean, I'm Malaysian, so there's a restaurant called, and it's gonna be super easy. It's called Restaurant Malaysia. It's in Richmond Hill. It is my go-to when it comes to I guess good Malaysian food. So yeah, that's you gotta check it out. Yeah.
I gotta ask you this. You've worked for Volvo, Lexus, Hyundai, Genesis was part of the group, Mercedes, now Volkswagen. Your favorite car?
It's actually none of the cars I guess none of the companies that I worked for, and the reason why, there was one time in my life where I went all out. I had a it's a Malaysian vehicle. It's called Proton. I had a Proton Satria GTI. So they had like a two-door hatchback, and it was souped up. Not souped up. It was maybe made to be a bit of like a Volkswagen GTI. And the reason I bring that car because I did a lot of things with that vehicle. I raced on weekends at the Sepang International Track, the Formula One track, and it was a time that I spent crazy money because pumping money into the car, racing it on weekends with friends, and yeah, it was a happy times, right? So I think of that car. If I could buy that car today, I would buy it and just store it. But yeah, that was fun because it was not just the vehicle; it's what I did with the vehicle, like racing it and with friends, and yeah, it brings me back to some fond memory.
That's really nice. I'm going to look it up and check out this vehicle for sure. Last question: the best advice that you've ever got?
Huh. Interesting. I mean, there's naturally this from a personal context and an organizational context. One thing that I've advised and maybe has also become my mantra is that as you move up in your career, and we talked about this briefly, that you've got you think of it as three different layers, right? That you're building in terms of your competency. You got your technical skills, and that's your foundational layer in this. Let's imagine a pyramid. And as you move up your career, it's not just technical skills that you need people skills, and or how do you engage with, I guess, your team members. But at the top of this pyramid is conceptual strategic thinking. What I found pretty profound, and I've applied this with with my teams, is that as you move up your career, is less dependency on your technical skills. If you think of your CEO or any CEO, they don't really know how to service a car, or maybe don't know how to sell a car, but they're clearly strong in engaging people, and they're really strong when it comes to conceptual strategic thinking. And that's something that I constantly think of, this path, because we sometimes beat ourselves up saying, oh, I don't have the technical skills. But as you're moving up, it's not just technical skills that you need. It's whether I can get the best out of my team members, and ultimately, do I have the learnings that I built to define the future vision when it comes to strategic or conceptual thinking, right? I've always found that profound, and I've taken that as, try to pass that learning to others as well.
Thank you very much. I have learned a lot from you during this conversation. I can guarantee you that the listeners are going to take away so much of value and actionable insights that they can apply to their own lives. And the one last thing that I want to sort of ask you is that if anybody listening wants to connect with you, where can they find you and how could they connect with you?
Well, LinkedIn is the easiest to, I guess, find me, and then from LinkedIn, like I said earlier, right? If I know why you're reaching out, I will most likely respond, and I typically would try to find some time, and it's usually early mornings that I will grab the phone and at least have a conversation. But yeah, I would start with LinkedIn.
Perfect.